A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke. When Jesus had come home to Nazareth, where he was reared, he said to the people of the synagogue, "No prophet gains acceptance in his native place. Indeed, let me remind you how many widows in Israel there were in the days of Elijah, when the heavens remained closed for 3.5 years and a great famine spread over the land. It was to none of these that what Elijah was sent, but to a widow of Zarephath near Sidon. And recall too how many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and yet not one of them was cured except Naaman the Syrian." Now at these words, the whole audience in the synagogue was filled with indignation. They rose up and expelled Jesus from their town, leading him to the brow of the hill on which it was built, intending to hurl him over the edge. But he went straight through their midst and walked away. The gospel of the Lord. You know, this is one of those great stories. I don't know if you know, in biblical times, leprosy was a fearsome thing. First of all, it was incredibly contagious. It was always fatal. Once you got it, the only thing you could do was endure it. And as a result, you just waited and waited. And slowly but surely, your skin dissolves to the point to where fingers or toes just disintegrate. It's kind of hard for us to imagine, but it is a horrible, horrible illness. But the understanding at the time was if you were a leper, then your job was to leave civilization as you knew it, everybody you loved and cared for, and go to the leper colony. And you kind of hoped that you made it there, because the protocol on the way was if you saw anybody, you were supposed to say, "Unclean, unclean." And their response when they actually met a leper crying out, "Unclean, unclean," was to pick up a rock and hurl it at them. The reason being is because obviously they were terrible sinners if God would let their skin disintegrate. So the thought process was better that they die from being stoned than being allowed to continue to dirty up the earth. So imagine there was really no great love of the idea of having to go to the leper colony. Most people hid out on their way there. So imagine now that Jesus uses this example of Naaman the Syrian, who, by the way, he's a foreigner, and a servant girl who was stolen from Israel and was a slave said, "You know, in my country there's a prophet, Elijah, who had the ability to heal those who had leprosy." And so Naaman tells the king that it's possible for him to be cured of this affliction if he goes to Israel. The king writes a tremendous letter and says, "Please cure my servant," sends it with him, and Naaman goes to Israel and visits at that time the king, who tears his garments and says, "Am I a god? Is it possible that I could ever cure somebody with such an affliction?" And he says, the only reason this guy did this was he's going to attack us for not taking care of his general. Anyway, Naaman leaves the king, kind of disappointed, but he finds out where the prophet is. And he goes to the prophet's house and says, "Could you cure me?" And the man immediately says to him, "Go down to the river and plunge in 7 times. And Naaman is vexed. Naaman says, "Wait a minute, aren't there waters in my own country? If it was as simple as bathing, why wouldn't I be clean already? This is ridiculous." And he leaves the prophet angry, except the servant girl is still there and says, "You know, if he'd told you to do something extraordinary, you know, like stand on your head and sing a long song, or wave your hands in the air, or whatever he would have asked you to do, set fire to that place on your body that's leprous, I'm sure you would have done it. So why not do what he told you to do?" So almost out of stubbornness, Naaman goes down, plunges in, and now his skin is as soft as a baby's. I often wonder, do we realize that God gave us laws not to be harsh, not to be cruel, not even to be strict, but to allow us to love God and to get along with one another. So then I say to you, is God's law strict, or are we the ones who really need greater understanding of the law? Oftentimes people say, oh, Father, that's not a big enough penance. And I say, you know, if I tell you to do a rosary, I just gave you 53 Hail Marys. And they're like, maybe I should do 5 rosaries. It's not about your physical suffering or the difficulty or peril. It's about being faithful to God and doing what you can to help others, lightening their load, not giving them a greater burden. During Lent, maybe we need to think about this, that our prayers are helping others, that our sacrifices are bringing about goodness. This week, that we're going to pray for the people of Russia, that they be consecrated in order to be protected from the evil that's besought their country. God bless you. Have a good day.